Hey everybody, welcome to the podcast. And I have an awesome guest that I wanted to talk to for a long time, and he's been very kind to sit down basically and have this conversation with me. Schalk Holloway, how are you doing?
Thanks, Wim. I'm very well, and yeah, it's quite a privilege for me to be able to talk to you as well. I think when we connected, I mentioned to you that back in the day when we were struggling to get good material in South Africa, and I discovered blogs. Yours was actually one of the blogs that I frequently went back to. So I've known about you for quite a long time, and yeah, for me it's a privilege. So thank you.
Oh, my pleasure. And that just means I'm getting old.
We're growing all together, so that's okay.
So quickly, and we mentioned this before we started recording. So we both have names that people don't know how to pronounce if they're not natives. So my name is Wim Demeere. So how do you pronounce, especially your first name?
Schalk.
Schalk. Okay, because I would think Schalk or Schalk is how we would read it in Dutch.
I think that's actually the accurate one. So I'm Schalk Willem, and then I've got an English surname, Holloway.
Okay.
So it's as English as you can get. So we in our country there's not that many Holloways, but our family is basically the only Afrikaans Holloway family. All my father's uncles and cousins are English. They're Georges and Jameses and so forth. Yeah.
Okay.
So no, the Schalk would be correct in Europe probably, but here we call it Schalk.
Okay, no, it's great. It's just, again, as my name's been mispronounced so many times, and it doesn't bother me. It's just that I know that when people talk to you, and like the French, they say Vim instead of Wim. They make it a V instead of a W. They are perfectly able to say the sound, because if you say yes in French, it's oui. You just add an M to the end of that sound, Wim, and you've got my name.
Wim. So interestingly enough, in South Africa, if you take that spelling in Afrikaans, Wim might be short for Wimpy, which is quite a common Afrikaans name. So I was also leaning towards Wim, but that's why I asked. So you say you don't mind. I'm okay if somebody mispronounces my name by accident. I'm not a guy with a lot of pet peeves, but one of my pet peeves is when people disrespect somebody else's name. I don't know where it comes from, but I've got this weird thing about pronouncing somebody's name correctly and also just encouraging other people to do it. So it really is a strange little peeve that I've got. I don't know where I picked that up, but I've got a thing about correct pronunciation of names. I think it's important.
Yeah. I agree. It's I was just talking about this yesterday. There's a fun guy on YouTube who is he's best known because he speaks fluent Chinese, and he's been learning like dozens of languages, and he goes to ethnic neighborhoods, mainly New York, but also all over the world. And he orders something in a restaurant or in a shop or whatever, and then he starts answering the people in their own language, and you see the eyes get big, like, oh. And then now he's doing stuff like African languages. He goes into a Nigerian a shop, and he starts talking. I forgot what the name of the language is. And the point that I made to one of my students just yesterday about this is that, look, if you just make an effort to speak somebody's language, always when you watch that guy's videos, they open up, they are friendly, they want to help you, they give you extra food. It's just you show that I bear no weapons. I come in good faith, and I am just showing that I am willing to do the effort to speak to you the way you like to be spoken to. And I think it starts with the name.
Yeah, definitely. It's a way of saying I value you. That's what it's about for me. So if somebody is disrespectful of a name, or they tease with it, or they make jokes about it, to me it says I don't value you. So and I've got my friends tease me about it. I've got a fine, healthy sense of humor, but I'm actually a very firm, comfortable with setting boundaries as well. So if somebody does that to me, I'll immediately correct them and tell them I don't like it and ask them not to do it again. usually you see people don't know what to do with that, because in their minds they were just joking, and I'll tell them I understand you were joking, but I don't appreciate it, so let's not do it again. And not everybody likes that approach, but that's usually what I'll do. And even if somebody does it with you, let's say they tease you or they mispronounce your name, I'll actually stop them and say, listen, you did hear that his name is pronounced as Wim, so I don't understand why you keep on doing.
Well, the only thing that I could say in their defense is that in certain languages, certain sounds are very different, or they don't have them actually, or they have them in a very different way, and it's very difficult for them to pronounce that. That's the only thing that I would say in their defense. But like you said, when people go out of their way to be assholes and just use it to to pick on you and to make you feel like crap, then they're just being dicks. So so the swearing is fine. We are going in for an explicit rating in this episode. So all right. Some questions. What's your background? So we're going to get to the books and everything else later, but could you talk a little bit how you got to training, self-defense, martial arts? What drove you? What have you been doing?
Okay, good stuff. So you can take my life and sort of split it in two, and so if we talk today, sometimes I'll talk about long ago or back then or things like that. That would be the first part, and then what would be the second part. But when I was in high school or secondary school, basically chose a path in life that that went into an unhealthy direction. But leaving school, I moved quite a far away from my home into one of our biggest cities, and I got involved with specifically of organized crime there. That led to quite a severe drug addiction as well. But during that time, I had a small group of guys that worked for me. We did club and event security at certain places. As a very young man, I was 19, 20, 21 years old, but we were doing quite a good job, and we had a couple of good contracts. And that eventually led into sort of the drug side of it as well, in the sense specifically of moving drugs between some of the larger metros, and also I never sold personally, but also having guys that would then receive drugs from us and trade with it. And so a lot of what I do is rooted within that. In that time, I think there was a lot of dabbling with different approaches and different sort of styles of martial arts and so forth. But ultimately, it was an environment where, if there was a problem, you had to sort it out really quickly. If you were working in clubs or events and there was a problem, you had to attend to it quite quickly. So it wasn't really a sport fighting background or, a dueling or traditional arts type of background. Basically, just if there's a problem, sort it out, carry on with business. And I think a lot of who I am is sort of rooted in that. But in around, let me think, about 7 years after that, let's say about 24, 25, around there, actually decided, okay, I need to probably take a different path in life. I was almost killed a couple of times during those couple of years. Specifically, almost shot frequently actually. But there was somewhere around 24, 25 where I realized, okay, if I'm going to carry on in this way, I'm probably not going to make it much longer. And I went to have a discussion with my primary team, the guys I was moving with around that time. I told them, listen, I need to basically said I need to leave, and they allowed me to. So something that I'm still quite grateful to this day, because a lot of people that come from that background, don't really get left to leave, if that makes sense. But I left them, and then for about another year, I was struggling with the drug addiction, just to get free from the drug addiction. But after a year, got experienced freedom from the drug addiction, very closely related to a faith experience I had. And from there, systematically started, just putting my life back together. That took a couple of years, because just sort of having to rebuild life from that, from what it was quite a complicated thing, if that makes sense, because all the relationships change. Being able to fend for yourself or create an income in a legal way, that changes, so rebuilding sort of the social networks change. Even simple things like what stories do you share when you're having a meal with people, because you can't really share those stories with people. So a lot of change during those couple of years, and then that sort of led into me starting to work and help in terms of specific types of services on the right side of the law. And lot of my experience in terms of what I'm doing today comes from that as well. So, for example, for about 12 years, 4 years, 4 years, 4 years, we actually purposefully moved to stay in at-risk communities, and in these communities on ground level, we would assist with certain types of interventions. During that time, also got the opportunity to go and work in different places in the world. Guys that invited me on team to say, please, can you come help with this or come help with this? And that sort of grew into who I am today. That might be the life story. During that time, then, like I said, back in the day, like before I sorted myself out, very informal training, not super focused or anything like that. But then afterwards decided, okay, I do need to actually invest in proper training. And I did that going through 3 different routes. The first thing I started doing Krav Maga, which I've left for reasons we can actually discuss. But I ended up doing 3 different Krav Maga systems and also qualifying and instructing in 2 of them. I also did in South Africa the farms training route, the professional farms training route. I'm graded as what's called an advanced instructor in all of our different categories in South Africa. And it's, arguable how good the quality of that professional training really is. But what I've also done is through some of this work I've been able to do and some of the teams I've worked on, I've been able to connect with guys that come from a very high quality training background, and basically submitted to them, and they've been mentoring me in terms of my own skills for the last 10 years or so as well. So that would be the professional training background. Commercially, what I've also done is I've now opened in April my 3rd training company. I don't really want to call it a company, maybe a training center. It's a 300 square training center in my hometown. Before that, I had 2 training centers in Cape Town. I had one for a couple of years. I moved, opened another one, and then I sold that one, moving to Hermanus. So I've also been in commercial training for about, let me just work it out quickly, for about 8 years now. And that would then also range from just training group classes, civilian clients, after work, or private civilian clients. But I've also personally trained large amounts of rangers in South Africa, TRT instructor teams. We've had guys from our Hawks come and train with us on a private level. The Hawks in South Africa might be akin to what you would see as a federal law enforcement body, meaning an overarching law enforcement body. We've trained guys from our liquor authorities, large corporate clients. At one stage, I had a couple of our large hotel groups, including the Western, Townhouse Hotel, things like that. The Lord Mount Nelson, we would give training to them. So not necessarily, my training route wasn't my training center route wasn't necessarily a large commercial civilian type of training setup. I've been able to provide, good training to a large amount of government and corporate clients as well during the last couple of years. How's that? Is that enough?
That's quite. It's interesting. Okay. I always ask because it's there's obviously what people put online on their website, but then there's the story that you can tell and the emphasis that you place where it is needed. In my experience, this kind of thing happens often in either very traditional martial arts that have had, how should I put that, an incorrect transmission, or a transmission in which certain things have been lost that used to be there when those things were used routinely by the people living in those countries where those styles originated from, or in systems that have a strong military background, because the assumption in the military is that, well, it's going to be a fit young guy who's really strong, who's in shape, who's been trained, who's off to war, and who's going to fight, who will be doing these techniques, not like a 60 or 55 kilogram girl or woman who only does this to protect herself, but it's not her main job. So the assumptions, the starting points are very different sometimes, and that can result into trouble. And then if you start looking for answers, well, what about this? It's very easy as an instructor to then be like, that I'm not really comfortable with that, because it takes me out of my comfort zone on the one hand, but on the other hand, it forces you to accept that, well, maybe your style isn't as perfect as you thought it was. Maybe for you, but not necessarily for everybody. And I think that is something that as instructors, we always have to be mindful of, is that one of the things, I've studied many systems, many styles and so on, and still train in a fair bunch of them. And one of them I always try to do is when I discover one, or when I discover a teacher or a method or a concept and so on, is immediately look at where does it break down? How far can we take this before it stops actually working correctly? Or can you bend the rules of the system? Can you break them? Or where does it absolutely not apply? And this is, for me, not all that revolutionary thinking. It's, you do that. I mean, you can have an awesome Lamborghini, McLaren car, whatever. They're great cars. They drive really fast. I wouldn't want to go take them on a safari in South Africa. That wouldn't go over all that well. Now take a really good Land Rover. That's going to be a lot better. I wouldn't want to race that Land Rover against a Ferrari on a very nice highway. So they're both great cars. They're just different. And it's understanding, like, where are the limitations? What is this tool used for? And then we get to one of my pet peeves, and a friend of mine said that, is that, mission comes first, tools come second. And a lot of times when you're actually going about learning a system, you fall in love with the tool. And I'm listening to one of Jocko Willink's podcasts about his past in the military and Iraq war and so on. And there's a lot of talk, and Dan Carlin's podcast, Hardcore History, also mentions that a lot of times, where the military falls in love, like, we've got this amazing weapon, we just got to use it, and then it's going to fix everything. Like, no, the weapon is a tool. And just because you have it doesn't mean that it's going to work. And the system is a tool, and it doesn't fit everybody. That was my mini rant.
Definitely. No, I agree with that completely. And I think what I also understand is that when it comes to the management of people, when it comes to the management of groups of people, having fixed methods for teaching, having fixed patterns for classes, having a very efficient way of driving the training space becomes very necessary. And so I've always had what I would see as the benefit of never having very large commercial training environments, meaning I've never had classes with 30, 40 people on the floor, where some of these guys do have that. Now, if you've got 30, 40 people on the floor, you need to be very, very efficient and controlling about how are we going to manage the space now. And I've always had the benefit of not having that, and I've actually always built my training spaces that I work up to about 18 people, and those people get sorted, maybe 21, they get sorted into working groups of 2 or 3, which means I just need to mentor, coach 7 units at a time. So I've always sort of, even if you walk into the arena now, you'll see that both my functional fitness space and my combative space is set up for 7 groups. So because I feel at 7, I start to lose control of the quality of it. And for me, that's very important. So I've always had this limiting thing. If I do courses, I only take 6 to 7 people. 6 people if I need groups, 7 people if I don't need groups. And I've been accused in the past of being a bad businessman, but that fits me because I feel that I can manage the quality of that. Now, I'm not saying anybody else has got bad quality, but what I'm saying is that the training space, in a certain sense, dictates also the training approach. You can't necessarily, with 20, 30 people on the floor, take a lot of individual time. You have to climb in there and sort of get the job done. And but also if we have to, you're talking about a mini rant there, but if I have to mini rant as well, a lot of these guys saying, they've got this combat system. Number one, it's not a combat system. Combat's what you do with your firearm when you're in battle and you're in war. So it's not a combat system. We can say it's a close combat system, or we can say it's a combative system. But number two, the context is different. You know, on the military side, if you hit contact, your priorities is probably kill, capture, contact. You know, when it comes to the civilian side, you know, there's legal expectation to run, hide, fight. Then when we fight, there's this legal expectation to only use the appropriate force required to actually stop the attack. And what we forget sometimes is that law enforcement and security, apart from certain special powers of arrest, fall under exactly the same legal framework as a civilian framework. Your special task teams or your SWAT teams or your HRT teams, they've got a different mandate. And usually they get called in when the shooting has to happen. Not that it is going to happen, but that's when they come in. And if they shoot, they go out, they file an incident report, and everybody carries on with life. But for your regular law enforcement, police officer, security worker, civilian, it's the same set of rules. So that means I need to be able to program in use of force decisions into my training methodology. But for me to be able to train in use of force decisions, it means that I need to have an assessment pattern built into every phase of the incident. I need to have a decision-making pattern built into every phase of the incident. I can't just go and arbitrarily say, I'm going to apply this force, because if the situation changes, I need to now adapt that force. And it's one of the challenges that we face with in South Africa. I know it's worldwide in South Africa with some of these very sort of, you know, militant, pure combat systems, is that they just teach lethal force. So you'll disarm the guy with the knife and you'll stab him in the neck, or you'll take the firearm off and you'll shoot. But you know, it's going to land you in jail quite easily. You're going to get into trouble if you just do that. So for me, it's better to be able to teach a client how to assess and make appropriate force decisions within the moment. But that means my training methodology needs to be adapted to that outcome. And that now brings us circular back to what I was explaining. You know, if you've got 30, 40 people and it's this pure combat system, there's no time for decision making, for assessment cycles. You know, this is the pattern: get in there, get the job done, kill the guy. Your life's more important, sort it out in court. You know, all of that nonsense. And that's just where I feel I've got a thing in my training where I say teach stupid, get stupid. If I'm going to treat my client as being incapable of assessing and rapid decision making, then they're going to be incapable. But if I take the time to teach them assessment cycles and to teach them proper decision making, they're going to be able to do that. Might take them slightly longer, but they will be able to do that. But that's up to me as instructor whether I'm actually going to try and do that or not try and do that. Yeah.
No, it makes perfect sense. And it's I've been teaching for many years now, and obviously my job is personal trainer, so I teach private classes. Teaching one-on-one is obviously, in my opinion, the gold standard if you want to learn anything, but it's not always accessible for most people. So then you get the group classes, and I've taught classes where it's about 100 people at a seminar, and or just 2 people that showed up. So anything in between goes. And like you said, if you've got a bunch of people in a room, I mean, just letting them move around, not even practicing techniques, but just move around without bumping into each other, that's a huge challenge and pretty much impossible to do. And at the same time, if it's like a group of 50 people, that's already a jam-packed room. But then they start crashing about and moving and doing the techniques. And there's when I teach class, a group class, I often start with, you know, there's always one guy. There's just always one guy who's going to be an idiot and not do what he's supposed to do. And just, okay, we're let's say, okay, you throw a punch and you have to defend, and we're explaining the technique, and he's going to go and feints and hit you when you're not looking and do a kick instead. There's always one guy. And I tell people, like, okay, so if all of a sudden you feel a tap on your shoulder from behind, you turn around, you see me, and I say, it's you, then you know that you have to cut that shit out. And it's not about that what you're doing doesn't work. It's just that you're creating an unsafe training environment for yourself, for your partner, and everybody around you. Because if you say, I'm not going to stick to what the instructor says, then everybody can do the same thing. And if everybody does that, then we've got mayhem, and we've got people rolling over the ground fighting. There's somebody breaking an arm over there, and that doesn't work. But you're special. I get it. You're special. You can do this, right? So like you said, groups of about 6-7 people, it's manageable. It's especially if you've got dynamic training that you're doing and scenario training, high intensity drills and so on. People are going to fall, they're going to slip, they're going to bump into walls. It's all going to happen. And with that kind of class, it's manageable. And also that, even if they're not going hardcore, just keeping an eye on, for instance, beginners. First time they go a little bit faster or add some intensity. You want to be on the ball and pick up on certain cues that this is not going well, or they're freaking out or whatever. So it makes perfect sense to me.
A lot of your thinking about two things as we're talking. Let me just share you a little anecdote from our training center, and I'll get back to the point I wanted to share now. But we don't grade anything. We've got something we call testing nights, and I've been doing it now for 4 or 5 years, because there was a need for our clients to try and judge whether they're growing or not. But I don't want to do a grading system. So on a testing night, for the whole session, you just get attacked randomly. The weapons get changed, the amount of attackers get changed. There's a floor instructor or coach busy monitoring you, and you get a 0 or 1. 0 is you died, 1 is you're out of there. Okay. Now, our guys tested from this new center. They've probably been training about 4 months now. And they were just testing on self-defense, not a complete close combat incident in the sense of ending at detainment and arrest or anything like that. So basically, it's just managing the attack and getting out of there. So self-defense. And they got quite high scores because it's just self-defense and it's not the complete process. But the highest score was 60% survival rate, and the lowest score was 40%. Usually when the guys test in my previous training centers on their first test, they test between about 25 and 45%. But in the past, I let them test on the whole process. So it's more complicated. There's more room for problems.
Yeah.
Now, if you have to now compare that to a grading system, where the whole idea is you have to learn how to perfectly execute this technique, and I'm checking whether you can do each of them perfect. So everybody grades on 100% technically, if that makes sense. Whereas with us, you don't pass or you don't pass, you get a percentage. Now, when I test you again next term, you need to see whether you've increased your percentage or not. Completely dynamic attacks, completely random. You don't know what's coming. You don't know what the angle of attack is going to be. You don't know how motivated this guy is going to be. He might fly at you with a knife immediately, or the knife might be hidden, and he might walk up to you and start patting your pockets or prop you against the wall, the knife coming out somewhere in there. So it's completely random and dynamic. And this is how we test, because it's a much more accurate, for me, accurate portrayal of whether what they've learned actually has now took or not. Because it's easy to have, I always tell them, it's easy to have in a commercial training environment, we do a disarm technique. Now, I do that disarm technique 50 times during the class within a controlled, scripted scenario pattern. By the end of the class, I feel very confident because I can do this disarm technique. But I remember at one seminar with IKM having to do a disarm technique, and I walked up to the guy and I smacked him on his chest. And I said, "Give me your fucking wallet." And the guy just crumbled. And he was like a 4th year high-level student, So the moment you change up the dynamism and the unpredictability of it, that's actually where you know whether the client is now took or not. But it creates a sense of discomfort. It creates a sense of vulnerability. They walk out of the testing night not necessarily feeling very good about themselves. We debrief it properly and we have proper discussions and so forth, but they don't walk out there feeling, yes, I'm this big hero. They walk out there feeling, oh, I need some more work, and which to me is a better outcome. Now, getting to the second point, your problem with beginner students or new clients or first-time comers is an issue of control. Most of your injuries, related to what we do, it's either not controlling a strike, so you basically get a bloody nose or cut eye or something, or it's not controlling the range of motion on the application of a joint lock, and a joint gets popped. And this is the issue again with beginner clients or large groups, is you need to have eyes on that guy to see what is he doing with his opponent's shoulder, what is he doing with the wrist, because they can't go in fast and stop at the exact moment. They're going fast and they overextend over the range of motion, and that's where your injuries tend to happen. So for us, it remains a management issue of how do we get to this outcome that we want. We want a client able to operate in a completely dynamic, unscripted environment, being able to control the mess, good assessments, good decision making under rapid conditions, under pressure, choosing the correct one, being able to desire the outcome. So how do we get that versus working with new people, having to control, having to manage a training space to make sure it's safe, all of that, that a lot of that was where our problems sort of started to creep in for me, and it comes back to training methodology. For us, we had to say, okay, how do we redesign our training methodology to be able to accommodate that? So for example, in the previous systems I did, let's say we did a stick defense, disarming a stick. Okay, guys swiping a pipe at you or a stick. In the previous systems, they would say, okay, tonight we are working on a horizontal stick defense. Okay, so the whole class, you just do that. So if you come to training in us, that thing gets swung at your head, your legs, your body, high, low, every single direction. And from day one, you have to you get exposed to the dynamism, and your brain gets forced to have to deal with that completely dynamic environment. But that means you have to adjust the training methodology for it to be able to, to be successful within the training environment.
No, makes perfect sense. And a question for you. So I always find this the most, for me as a teacher, this is the most interesting part. So one of the things that often happens when you have these very dynamic testing sessions where it's just very chaotic and people basically you jump in the water and you have to sink or swim, is that when you notice that they're making certain mistakes, how do you correct them afterwards? Because these kind of sessions can very deeply ingrain certain responses.
Yes.
Not necessarily the ones that you want, and then there's a range between completely wrong and perfectly executed and anything in between. So when you see that they're doing certain things or the techniques a certain way that you think, well, I can actually see that this works for you right now, or it worked in this specific scenario because this and this factor was happening, but if you try that against that guy, it's not going to work, and I need to teach you that. So all the nuances and so on come out. So how do you correct them once you notice something like that?
Okay, so there's a couple of streams, I think, within a good answer to that. One of the streams would start with technique selection for me. So we've got something that we call a parameter for the techniques we include in our system, is a word we use, robustness. So that means one technique needs to be effective against quite a wide variety of incoming attacks or problems. But alongside the fact that it needs to work against a wide variety, it needs to have a bunch of inbuilt fallback positions. So we select specifically techniques that meet those two criteria. For example, let's say trying to do a firearm disarm is never an ideal thing, okay? But in South Africa, we do live in an environment where, you might get shot first and, get robbed second. So there is valid reason to train it, but you need to still be conscious about the risks involved and know what you're getting into if you do train it. So I just want to put that as a disclaimer. But our principle for any sort of controlling of a weapon is two hands on. And ideally, we would like to get one hand on the firearm and one hand behind the firearm, behind the strike or the hammer. And the primary reason for that is that if you touch that weapon, the guy's going to jerk. He's not going to intentionally jerk because he's not thinking about it. It's just that you're touching his weapon and he's going to catch a fright and he's going to yank it. and there's a spectrum of maybe just a little jerk, or really trying to get it out. So we try and backstop the weapon, so he can't pull it back. And now I've given him back a line of fire that he can keep on shooting at me. But the technique that we use works whether I get the firearm neatly, whether I get his hand, whether I get his wrist, or whether I get his forearm. And so there's a lot of scope for technical imperfection within the technique that we've selected, if that makes sense. So it starts for us by selecting techniques that's got a very single techniques with a very broad application, but also with a lot of fallback in terms of imperfection. So that's where we start, number one. Then the second thing that we look for within a testing, and we debrief our clients individually, but we also discuss it in a group. We try and notice where they are preferring one technique above another technique, and we'll try and understand the preference and see how do we then correct that within the next training sessions. So, for example, we've got 3 firearm disarm techniques, just 3. If you go to some of these other systems, there's 50 of the things. Okay, we've just got 3, and those 3 gets applied through the whole spectrum of problems. And we don't do fancy stuff like try and disarm pistols against the back of the head and nonsense like that, because it's just not going to work. So we don't have a whole range of fancy, weird things. If I'm not in position to disarm, I either work for the position or I don't attempt to disarm. That's my options. I don't do something stupid and I get killed. So we've just got 3 different disarms that we use. Now we call them the pushing defense, the pulling defense, and the arm defense. Now let's forget about the arm defense. In Tuesday night's testing, the guys were favoring the pulling defense the whole time and not really doing the pushing defense, even though situationally about 50% the opportunity for the pushing defense was present. So what we do then is we say, okay, in our next cycle of training, we're going to correct for that. So Thursday night when they came, we started working on the pushing defense. And then we would bias our training towards whichever dominant problem we found in the training environment. And we would maintain the things that they were doing well. Okay, so that would be the second stream of managing that. The third stream of managing that process would be along the lines of, if it's stupid and it worked, it's not stupid. Meaning, if you survived, you get your 1. But let's talk about the risks in terms of what you just did, and we'll have a conversation about that. But we actually try and you've read the Maul book, and you know that we're very process orientated. So we actually try and stay away from a technique orientated mindset. So when we're testing or when we're pressure testing, I actually don't want the guys to be thinking about techniques. I want them to be thinking about assess, entry, control, takedown or release, finish. What happens is, if you work with guys that come from a very technique-heavy system, they're confronted with this dynamic sort of pressure test. At some stage, they'll freeze up and they'll tell you, I can't remember what to do. And what that explains is, it explains that they can't remember the trick or the technique. So there's 50 ways to control somebody's shoulder, but control is control. So technically, you shouldn't be forgetting control, if that makes sense. Yeah. So when it comes to pressure testing and test nights, what I want to see is whether they're driving the process. I don't actually want to see whether they're perfectly executing the techniques, because the process is what's going to get them through the incident. It's not actually the perfect technique that's going to get them through the incident. Does that make sense?
Yeah. No, that's great. Go ahead.
No. I think that I can summarize it as, if you want to get to know me and my personality, I'm pretty much all about, let's get the job done. Let's do what's needed to get the job done. That's sort of where my mindset is. I want to get in there. I want to get out of there as soon as possible. And we do what we need to do to get that done. Yeah.
Makes perfect sense to me. And again, like I said, it's I mentioned earlier that you often get that when you practice military-based or systems that originally came from the military or law enforcement or what have you, is that very often the the standard assumption is that it's going to be somebody who's in shape. It's going to be a guy. He likely has experience or will have experience by the time he actually uses this, and that's not true for everybody. So so it's always interesting to me when we look at, okay, so what are our students doing wrong and how can we help them get better? Because you as a teacher and from your own experience, you know what's coming next in the curriculum or whatever you want to teach. And you can also see that, well, this will work here and now in training, but because the way that you're doing this or some of the things that I'm seeing you do, you might end up in what I call a dead-end street in your training, that all of a sudden you cannot get any further and you have to go back and unlearn and relearn stuff. And one of the big examples is that, and if you feel like talking about it, that would be great, but you mentioned that, you know, you almost got shot and killed a few times. I try to explain that sometimes to students that let's say you're in some sort of martial sport, kickboxing, Muay Thai, MMA, doesn't matter. The first time you have a punch come at you, maybe you freak out and you don't know what to do and you're all over the place. And then you start training, you learn head movement, you learn parrying, blocking, what have you. It gets better. And then you have to do it with a partner. And at first it's going to be fine. And then the coach says, okay, it's just going to be the jab. Just have to parry the jab. That's all you have to do. If you go slow, it works. But once it goes faster, you start freaking out a little bit and it doesn't work as well. And you start flinching and all that happens. And you get over that with training. And then it's in sparring. And then light sparring, and then it might work. And all of a sudden it's hard sparring and you've never had that before, and so on. So they're all levels of intensity that go higher, and your quality of performance tends to go way down at first, and you have to rise above that. So, and that's, you go all the way to the sparring wars that you sometimes have in certain places. And that's about as far as you can take it, with some exceptions. And then you get to a competition fight. And that is a dimension apart. We're not even talking about the same thing. Everything changes, the context and so on. There's a guy specifically there for you. He's going to hurt you. He's going to knock you out, or worse, if he can get his way. So that's a difference. And then we get your first amateur fight, and then your first professional fight. Same thing, dimensions apart. What I try to tell people is that once you've experienced those new dimensions, your training takes a very, very different approach. If you look back from everything you learned from the start, it's like a different filter. You see things through a different lens, and you understand better, this is important and why, and this not so much. And I found that when I teach self-defense, it's very hard sometimes to explain certain things to people, like, right, so this worked, you got out of there. So what I tell my students, like, okay, what you did wasn't wrong, because A, you didn't get punched in the face, or you didn't get whatever the attack was, it didn't land, so that's great. But let's look at, maybe we can do it a little bit better, or this is great, but this is not what I showed you, but it worked. Yeah. And then we get to points like, okay, I don't think this is going to work outside of the training environment. And then they just have to take your word for it. Like, okay, you've experienced some of this stuff. Okay, I haven't, so they have to believe you. I find this to be the biggest challenge. Like when you have certain real life experiences that open the, so-called new dimension that I just mentioned. It's one thing from the class or the dojo into the street, and it's something else from a stupid brawl or fight or shoving contest in a bar or what have you, to somebody actually trying to kill you. It's dimensions apart. So if you want to share your thoughts about that, how you teach that, or how you approach that, that'd be great.
Yeah, I think so. So for us, if we have to talk about, let's bring it back to the brain, system 2, system 1. And let's plug it into that. In the Maul book, we talk about this concept of thresholds, which determines when the brain would switch between system 2 and system 1. The primary thresholds, I think, that pertain to what I want to say now is the one of emotionality, or maybe emotional intensity, number 1. And number 2, the speed of incoming information. Now, when we talk about these dimensions, we're actually talking about those 2 factors becoming more complex every time, if that makes sense. Né? So if we talk about the spectrum of getting to, let's say, to a boxing gym from day one to that professional fight, on one level, what we're facing is the increasing emotional intensity of all of these new factors that I'm facing there. From the complexity to my first fight, to the guy wanting to punch me, to the guy wanting to kill me. That's actually all on that emotional spectrum where I'm dealing with the psychological side of it. Then the other side of that factor is the speed of incoming information, which for all intents and purposes is what we would call the dynamism of the encounter, meaning the speed at which things are happening and the speed at which things are changing. Now, we try to account for those two factors within our training environment, because whether it's happening in the dojo or out the dojo, somebody relentlessly assaulting you has got the same dynamic pattern. Okay, somebody relentlessly assaulting you has got a lot of that same emotional intensity, whether inside or outside the gym. But obviously, when I'm outside the gym, there's this added factor of I can actually get killed now. There's nobody that's going to step in now. So it's difficult to account for that extreme there. So what we do is we'll add load and bump up those factors, increase dynamism, increase in intensity the whole time, till we find a breakdown point. And then we'll debrief the breakdown point, try and error correct for the breakdown point, and then we'll continue to increase on that spectrum. So that would be our training methodology, and which culminates in the testing night of just not knowing exactly what's going to come at you, and there's multiple people, and there's no holding back. You know, obviously they're not stabbing each other with steel knives, but they're really going at it with each other. So we would try and emulate those things, because actually what I want to do as an instructor is I want to force the switch to occur so that I can see whether system one is being conditioned enough or not.
Yeah.
And I need to do what I need to do to force the switch within the training environment. And once the switch has been forced, I can now see what's coming out, because system two is very much like, let's say I'm a computer programmer. System two is me sitting there programming, I'm typing the code. System one is me running the code.
Yeah.
System one might be me programming my airplane's autopilot through manual control. System one will be me activating the autopilot. And so essentially system two is our mechanism for training system one. System one being whichever neurons have wired together to such an extent that they would now fire under those extreme conditions. And so I want to push it, I want to cross the threshold, and I want to evaluate. And then when I see whether it's taken or not, then I need to come back and I need to fix what I need to fix. Now, all of us have the same thresholds, but what would happen is, depending on demeanor and training and background, my threshold might be further or closer in some of these factors than your threshold, but we have the same threshold. So you might be slightly cooler under pressure, so you might be able to handle more emotional intensity than me, but I might be slightly more adept at reading incoming information than you, for example. And so what you'll find is your clients, in terms of those thresholds, all of them have them, but some of them, the threshold will be further or closer. But what I'm attempting to do through pressure testing, through unscripted scenarios, through increasing of load, is I'm trying to push them over that threshold. Sometimes what you also see is you push them too far and they completely crumble because there's just nothing. Sometimes what you are mentioning now about them doing something silly that worked, but it's actually silly. All that's telling you is that the programming hasn't been done sufficiently yet. And because what does the brain do? The brain just fires the neutrons, and the neutrons control the movement. From the brain, it goes to the motor units, which control the muscle fibers, and you see movement happening. And so when they're doing something funny under pressure, it means that that's actually what's been coded in. And for us, our job as instructors is sometimes to realize, shucks, there's still a bunch of nonsense in there that I need to sort out. if we have to think about something like for me on the farms training side, when I start with new clients, the correct way to I want to say how to do this on the, there we go. Let's say this is my pistol of the slide. The correct way to charge a firearm, a semi-automatic firearm, is to take the slide or the cocking lever, pull it all the way back till it can't move anymore, and then let it go, because it's got a coil on this inside with specific tensions that needs to do the job on the inside. But what I see of a lot of new clients is they do this. They move it back and then they move it forward, okay? Why do they do that? Because they saw it on movies. So there's literally this faulty pattern that came in through the sensors that's been stored in System 1, and System 1, when it fires, now does this weird pattern. And for us as instructors, sometimes we need to be able to see, okay, I need to just build on the pattern a little bit more, or I need to be able to see, shucks, that pattern is still non-existent, whichever it is, because once they go to System 1, that's the program. Then we see what's actually been programmed into it. And then what we use System 1 for as well is the conditioning aspect. So we'll practice in System 2 in a scripted environment, because we're practicing movement patterns. So we're trying to get specific neurons to fire together, specifically the neurons that would now, in a technically correct manner, execute the technique. So let's think about a cross punch. I want to have that perfect starting from the toes, getting that kinetic chain working through the torso, shoulder, into the punch, however those dynamics look. So I would just work that consistently in System 2, nice and controlled, speed it up, and then make sure that I can do it at speed, which means that System 1 has now pretty much accepted the movement pattern. But now the actual question is, can System 1 use the movement pattern under extremely dynamic conditions? Meaning, can it accurately and powerfully punch in a real fight or not? So now I need to simulate the dynamism of that, meaning I need somebody's head moving around, I need them to be emotionally excited and all of that. Now, we would pressure test or test as a mechanism of conditioning. So not necessarily as a mechanism of training, but as a mechanism of evaluation and as a mechanism of conditioning. Now we take that straight punch and we dump it into a wide variety of situations, and we force the brain to be able to apply it within those within that dynamic spectrum.
Yep. No, it makes perfect sense to me. This is one of the things that I often I teach an MMA class as well, and we start with drills nowadays. I used to start with techniques, but several years ago I switched, and much to the thanks because of my Kuntao training with Bob Orlando, because he was really big on drilling and using drills for many reasons that unfortunately many people misunderstood, but that's a different topic. And what we do now is I have basic drills that we teach, and they are, like you said, they're the programming. So all you're doing is learning stuff. But one of the things they're also learning is that, well, I have to rephrase that. They're learning many things at the same time. They just don't know it yet. These things will become evident later in their progress when they are ready for it, where I can point to, remember how I told you that every single time you finish, you have to step back, regardless of which point in the drill you are at. It's not that you have to step back. It's that stepping back is the easiest way to disengage, but it's about working on your exit, as opposed to throwing a punch or a kick or a combination and then just standing there to see what happens. You have to have an exit first. And now we're going to work on different exits from stepping back. And all these things afterwards suddenly become apparent, and I can point to the drill. The drill was never about you have to do it this way and because it's the best way. It's only about you have to do it this way, so you learn things that you can turn into skills later on.
Yes.
And we gradually increase intensity. Like we have drill number 3, it's close quarters, it's 2 hooks to the body, 2 hooks to the head, and then he does the same thing to me, and it just goes over and over. That's the basic drill. We drill until the drill breaks. When somebody can't keep up, he gets hit or he does the wrong technique. The point is that we know it's going to break, like you said, there's a switch happening, you can't keep up. Okay, you learn to act on the point of breaking. Like this is when you shove the guy, grab the guy, step off to the side, throw a kick, whatever. You do something, but you don't stay stuck like, what's going on? And it's, for me, it's all about gradually building up that intensity and trying to maintain the skill set as technically proficient as possible, so that you can perform at a high level, maintaining, you know, a more or less lucid mindset, as opposed to freaking out and just flailing about. And what I always find fascinating is that so many people stay stuck in that idea that, well, fine motor skill is out the window, this is out the window, this is not going to work when adrenaline hits you. And I'm like, excuse me, this is such bullshit. I mean, you're a firearms instructor. Nothing about firearms handling is instinctive. We weren't born with, you know, AK-47s in our hands. This is a purely taught mechanical skill. There's nothing,
including a lot of fine motor skills.
And that was my point, is that everybody knows at first when you teach that just basic stuff like control trigger pull, or even muzzle discipline. Let's just start with that. Like, don't flag everybody all over the place. That is not instinctive. But like you said, fine motor skill of just under high speed training, incredible intensity, your life is on the line, stress, and you have to do a fine motor skill technique, like not just yanking the trigger. And people do it all the freaking time. They show it 18-year-old boys in boot camp, and they manage to figure it out. And you're telling me that all fine motor skill is out. Anyway, I'm off on another rant, but
no.
Back to you, Schalk.
We've something that I think, but there's certain things that we repeat over and over and over and over in our classes. But the moment I see a breakdown during a practice segment of class, so we've got training, we've got practice, and we've got testing. Okay, so training is I'm teaching you. Practice is you are now getting in volume of repetition. Testing is we're putting it in a dynamic situation, adding load to see whether system one has taken it or not. So those are three, and we run these cycles through our training the whole time, through our sessions. But the moment in the practice session that I see a breakdown in technique, they get yelled at, slow it down. Because slowing it down is the easiest way to actually get back under threshold. Because in practice, the job is not dynamic conditioning. In practice, the job is very simply just the movement pattern. So let's say we take your drill of body, hook. Now you get to the place where it's a breakdown. If you just slow it down marginally, you'll probably be able to successfully execute it. If you then keep it slow marginally for enough time, you'll eventually be able to speed it up to the point that the body mechanics allows it. You know, there is a maximum velocity in terms of what we can achieve, but playing with that speed is usually the easiest way to do the dynamic side. The emotional side is quite tricky. I'll share two times that I almost got shot as a young man, and because they're very sensible within the context of self-defense and not being stupid. But the first time was when I was working security at a club, not in my hometown. I was on holiday, and they asked whether I would come and help. And I was standing at the door. Well, just quickly, just what it looks like. But there's a flight. It's in a shopping center with a flight of stairs going up, probably about 2 floors, but it's a straight line of stairs. And then you get to the top, you turn left, you get onto the, what do you call it, where you walk the floor, man. I don't know what you call it. Anyway, I see what and then you walk into the door of the club. And there was a guy pitched up there. He was hassling the head bouncer. And it was my first night there, and maybe I felt I needed to impress. I'm not sure exactly why I did what I did. And this guy just got difficult, and it got more dynamic. And I thought, I'm just going to smack the guy. And I just punched him, and he took a bit of a tumble down the stairs and carried on. And about 10 minutes later, the whole crowd on the bottom of the stairs just split and started shouting. This guy came running at me with a pistol, and I just ducked for the shooting and went inside, and the other 2 guys were armed, and they addressed the situation. But the guy actually just ended up leaving after some shots were fired. So my own stupidity The next one I'm going to tell you is even more stupid than that one, but it's very difficult to even mimic that, because the interesting thing of that is I wasn't super stressed out or emotional when it happened, because it happened so fast. Does that make sense? There wasn't time for a buildup of emotion. And I think that's just something that we need to address as well, is that initially, if this type of thing is new to you and the first time it happens to you, you're not necessarily going to be super afraid. You're probably going to be looking at the situation, be in a little bit of denial about what the hell is actually happening here, trying to understand it. And then as you start catching up with it, you might get a little bit more emotional. But most people actually hit the emotion after the incident, especially if it's a quick in and out incident, meaning it's not a very protracted, drawn out thing, which in South Africa, unfortunately, we do have with our prevalent home invasions, where they'll keep the guys there for 4 hours and 6 hours and things like that. But it's not necessarily that you're going to feel that emotion, you know, in the moment. You first have to deal with the reality of the situation, and then this guy just started shooting at me, but I usually tell my clients, listen, if he's not shooting at you yet, he probably wants something. So part of our assessment phase is to try and ascertain, what does this guy want? Why is he threatening me with force? It means he wants something. So my first job is to understand that picture before I can even start thinking about whether I need to respond physically or not. The second time, also a couple of years after that, I actually got into an argument with a guy in somebody else's club because he didn't have an entrance stamp. Got nothing to do with me. I was very, very drunk. And we've got a thing in our house. My wife knows I don't drink much, but she knows I don't touch vodka, because there's this trail of incidents when I drink vodka, but I drank a lot of vodka. I was very drunk. And I got into a fight with this guy, and I remember I was very drunk, but I remember he didn't have a stamp, and I was giving him problems about not having a stamp. And he said he's going to shoot me. And I knocked him out. I just gave him one punch, boom, and he fell over and he was lying there. And I forgot about him. And later at night, when I walked out all drunk, guy came running at me, and I was just ducking bullets behind the car, and he came running up around the vehicle right in front of the club door, and I just ran around the other side, and we followed each other, and I ran back into the club, and I went and jumped out of over the fence at the back, and some of my mates came and helped me on that side. Also stupidity, you know, no, just plain idiot, because I mean, it's got nothing to do with me. You know, in that case, no emotion, because I was too drunk. You know, I was just trying to duck it and get away from it as well. So I'm just adding this to say also that, you know, it's not necessarily that when these things happen, you're going to have a, you know, super emotional experience. We do try and create emotional intensity with our training environments, but our big weight is on the dynamism of the situation. Our big weight that we play is on it being unscripted, and the fact that you don't really know. You know something might be coming, but you don't really know what's coming or where it's coming from. And that uncertainty factor messes with the guys' heads big time. And so we try and emulate that quite a bit when it comes to these testing events.
Great. That's a great answer. Thanks. We mentioned it already a little bit. So your book, The Maul, has been quite successful. So for people who don't have it, I will post a link to the book in the show notes, and you can get that at winsblog.com/71. So 71, the numbers, and any links that you know, Schalk and I come up with, I'll post them there. What got you to write the book? How did you get started?
I was in a conversation with a guy I know. So first of all, it sort of coincides with this period of life that I was thinking about training methodologies and changes to training methodologies. So I was quite open to trying to understand how to do that. So that was just the phase of life in which I looked at the book. Then I was in a conversation with a guy, and he mentioned that the triune brain model doesn't exist. And I thought, you know, but this thing is used everywhere. And I started digging about the triune brain model. And that eventually led me to guys like Kahneman, you know, that were proposing different approaches to the brain itself. And I actually became quite convicted that the triune brain doesn't exist, okay? Because there's no, you can't actually find any form of any form of empirical sort of proof that it exists, number one. But number two, what's been happening on the brain research side is exactly the opposite. Whereas the thinking was that you've got these very separate locuses of control, that even when system 2 and 1 fires, when it lights up an MRI, you actually pick up that it's very, very, very integrated. And so I thought, okay, there's something here. And then I started realizing, but a lot of what I'm finding in training, the breakdown in techniques, the breakdown in technical proficiency, the struggling with decision making, the issue on training methodology, all of that sort of feels to me like it's related to the switch happening between these two systems. And then I approached Gavin and we had a chat. We decided, let's do the book project together. But then a lot of it was then trying to say, okay, how do we now formulate this so that it's applicable for other people as well? And so the natural progression for me was describing the problem, building on some of the work that's already available, so that people can understand the inherently complex and extremely dynamic nature of these incidents. Because if you haven't been in one, I mean, I've been in incidents like these where I thought I was winning the game and then I end up getting my head kicked in, things like that. These incidents with me being shot a couple of times, and I don't always want to relate the anecdotes because people overemphasize the little stories there. But, there's a problem there in the industry that we don't always understand it, and specifically that people don't understand assault patterns. So they get dueling and they get these things, but the assault pattern is something that I don't see happening in training enough. So I wanted to discuss the problem and then to discuss, okay, but what is research showing us in terms of how we can solve this problem? And then the third part of the book is simply an attempt to show people how can you use this to formulate a systemic approach. Because I don't want to, I believe in what I do. I use what I do professionally, not just in terms of a training environment. I've been working in this environment for a very long time, since a young man, just in different contexts. I use what I teach quite a bit, so I know if it's working or if it's not working. I mean, I've been there and I've done that, but I still don't want to profess that I've got all the answers, because I don't. I don't. You understand? None of us really do. We sometimes tools work, sometimes they don't. We can do the best with what we've got, but it's not that and I don't want to be that guy. These guys in the industry, this is the ultimate system. And so for me, the question was, how do I write a book that anybody can use? Not necessarily how do I write the book there whereas now you need to adopt my system. So you don't see the Maul groups over the world. You don't see me teaching people how the system. I actually stay away from that. If people ask me now, we want to see videos of the system, I'll usually say something along the lines of, it's very difficult to record it. If you've got a specific question, tell me and I'll help you. And I always help. Like, you can ask people, if somebody asks me, I always help. But I don't want to build a system, build a cult. I'm actually very, very specific in avoiding that whole thing. And so everything that I put out, even the little book on combatives, I'm actually launching a new book now, book on combative, the book on fundamentals. I'm now launching a little book on combative principles. Again, all of the books are written so that somebody else can take it and they can incorporate it into their work. Weirdly enough, and I mentioned it in the introduction of this new book, I sometimes get feedback along the lines of, how can I say it? I want to say it respectfully. You can pick up, people want me to make it easier for them, because the books aren't written to be easy. The books are written to give you understanding, depth of knowledge, so that you've got what you need to integrate it into what you do. And what I find with some of the feedback is people didn't sign up for that integration component. They actually want a nice, comfortable, fluffy book that's a good read, and they're going to close it and they're going to feel warm and fuzzy on the inside. But none of the books do that. All of the books that I put into the market actually avoid that as well, because it forces you to have to think And it forces you to have to select what is actually applicable to you and then figure out how am I going to integrate it into my system. I don't want to teach you the Maul. I don't even want to call the Maul a system. There's a set of principles, there's an approach that we use, but it's not even a system. You can't go find it somewhere and do instructor classes and things like that. And it's called the Maul for a specific reason, because it emulates the chaos of a Maul, but it's a directed and a focused chaos, which is what animals do. You know, if they're really going at it, it's chaotic, but they're actually trying to get to a specific outcome. And that just encapsulates for me what we're trying to do. It's a mess. It's a very complicated mess, but we need to try and drive this mess into a specific direction. And the material that I put out there tries to assist people in understanding how to do that better.
That makes perfect sense to me. It reminds me of a few things that come to mind. An old instructor of mine once said that fighting is chaos, and it's your job to bring order in that chaos. And on the other hand, one of the things that I wrote an article about this a while ago, and I'll add the link to the show notes. I once described that if you look at, and this was a big realization for me, if you look at violence as a dynamic emergent system, then you change your approach to how you handle it. And dynamic emergent systems are very, very, it's a very scientific term that one of my friends is a rocket scientist. So he's very, very smart. And he said that, okay, I can live with that, what you just said. So if you look at violence as an emergent dynamic system, what it means is that there's a fight, there's a shooting, a stabbing, whatever, it doesn't matter. Now, you record it from, let's say, every single angle. You have all the information. At the end of that, you can analyze it, come to conclusions, find principles, find important facts, irrelevant ones, and so on. You get all this data and all these conclusions that you can draw from that. And you can find that there's actually a systematized approach that you can take to handling this situation.
Yes.
That might be the conclusion. However, when you look at 0 seconds of all those videos, you look at the situation, you have no idea that it's going to play out that way.
Yes.
So you do know that there's a system in there that you can develop, or principles that you can draw out of this that you can use for other incidents. But it's dynamic, meaning it's very much changing constantly due to all the many factors that are involved. And it's emergent because it's going to come out of it at the end.
Yeah.
And that is a fundamentally different approach than saying like, right, here are a bunch of techniques and he grabs you here, you do this, he grabs you there, he punches that, and you do that. I'm not saying that's wrong per se. I'm just saying that it's a different way of looking at the problem. And the more I train, the more I get older, and the more I learn, the more I'm looking into basically managing these dynamic systems and looking at skills as opposed to techniques. For me, for the past 20 years, it's been about skill development as opposed to, you know, how well can I do my jab, or how well can I do this joint lock? It's sure. Okay, how well can you pull off that joint lock when you actually need it? With all the different factors that will change from one incident to the other. Yeah,
definitely. Yeah, there's process involved. It's a process, and something that I carefully say is that with a close combat incident, the incident is in control.
Yeah,
it's the job of the practitioner to manage, to drive, to resolve the incident. But if we have to think about a storm with a ship, actually the storm is in control. The guy on the ship needs to make sure that he rides the storm out, in as good a way as possible. And that's very much how I feel about it, is that the CCI is actually in control, and I need to have these skills and tactics to be able to manage or resolve it. Because of the complexity and the dynamism that you managed, it's always unpredictable. You can't actually predict it completely. The only way you can predict it is if you're in the military and you're 200 kilometers away and you drop a bomb on the building. That's pretty much it. But if it's here and it's close range and in each other's faces, it becomes very, very, very tricky. And that incident then is in control. And my successful resolution of the incident is based on whether I can actually manage these factors, manage this process, and take it where I need to take it. But that doesn't sit comfortable with a lot of people because, again, when it comes to a commercial training environment, I say it in my new book, if you look at how training is slanted, training is always slanted to make it easier for the trainee. Meaning, if you think about things like a lot of the systems that you see, or knife-based approaches that you see currently, is you'll see that the defender goes at the guy with the knife and the guy turtles up like this, or they'll even stand still and they'll practice these techniques on each other, or the guy will stab and he'll keep this arm out here, and then they'll do 1, 2, 3 manipulations on this arm to do a disarm. So there's all of these sort of assumative patterns built into the training environment that all of them benefit the trainee, but which I understand for a commercial training environment. But now let's say you go and you assault your trainee, they're not going to come back to class. You understand? So there's this weird thing happening in the training environment where we need to figure out how do we project realistic, unpredictable, dynamic pressure onto this trainee so that he can actually learn how to manage it, And then, as you are saying, techniques and perfect techniques is not where it's at. It's about skills. It's about principles. It's about being able to manage this mess, drive this process to reach the conclusion that I want to reach. Very little, for me personally, I see very little commercial combative instructors talk about process or talk about systems. They doing this technique, even if you do the something like the grading. I remember with IKM, let's say you have to do a handgun disarm. Now you stand still like a robot like this, and then you get graded on whether the guy can do this perfect disarm on somebody standing still like this. It's not realistic, And then if you grade, you pass.
Well, I would say it's a good start. You have to start somewhere. Like you said, writing the code. Start there, but move out of that phase to.
It can't be the test. It can't be the thing that tells you whether you are ready. That's the big difference there. But with the problem of these systems is that they say, "Oh, good stuff. Here's your certificate. You're ready," and that's not. That's something that's very, very, very dangerous.
Yeah. No, it makes sense. And there's something in the book. There's a bonus chapter that I really enjoyed tremendously. It's stupid things people say. Now, if there's one thing that I like, it's a chapter like that. And there's a bunch of them. I won't go all of them, but there's the first one is, I would rather be judged by 12 than carried by 6. That always, I find that so staggeringly stupid and narrow-minded. And yes. Now I've got this great example, and I'll say, look, regardless of what you feel about the outcome and the person, so put all politics aside, put everything aside, the Rittenhouse trial in the United States just finished. He was found innocent in the sense that his claim of self-defense was upheld and all charges were dismissed. He shot 3 people, killed 2, and blew off the bicep of the other one. He was found not guilty. So he was in jail for, I think, 3 months, or 2 months, due to his first lawyer team. He's pretty much been living in I wouldn't say in hiding, but he's had to be very careful. Yeah. His defense cost, I think the number I heard was $2 million. That was crowdfunded to pay for the lawyer fees and everything else. His face is all over the world. He will never, ever outlive this, ever. This will always follow him until the day he dies. Yeah. Even in 50 years, when he's an older man with maybe grandchildren, you look up his name online if there's still an internet back in those times, and that's what's going to come up. People will have opinions of you, and he has to live with the trauma of actually having killed people, which is a state that let's say is on your soul, for lack of a better word, that you're going to have to live with. And what might seem extremely logical, reasonable, and the right thing to do at one point. 10, 20 years afterwards, you might feel different about that, and it's too late.
Yeah.
So that is what Judge by 12 looks like.
Yeah.
And you're saying you'd rather have that than being dead. So I get the point. I get the point. But how about try to avoid both, which is kind of the point you made, is how about we don't pick either one? Both door number one, door number two, they both suck. Pick a different door.
We've got a problem in South Africa because of our politics locally, that we've got quite a sort of, in our white community especially, quite a bit of a opleving, emphasis being placed on not being militant, but preparing now.
Yeah.
And what I'll usually ask these guys, so for me personally, and I'll say this outright, I've done significant damage to people on both sides of the law, meaning inexcusable, malicious, horrible damage on this side, justified use of force within the correct bodies, within the correct supervision on this side. Both of them bother me. Okay, so both of them still mess with my head, even though I'm at peace with the ones I was justified, and I've found some peace in terms of the one I was unjustified. I still find myself thinking about it and considering things, and so there's a lifelong change on you. And then to drive that home with my clients, I'll usually say, so who's married? Get 10 guys, put their hands up. Say, okay, good. So when was the last time you had a fight with your wife? Just an argument, like a bad argument. No, 2 days ago. How did you feel? No, they didn't feel good. I said, okay, great. So an argument with your wife, meaning you've hurt your wife's feelings, has this emotional effect on you. Just an argument. So just try and understand doing significant amounts of damage to another human being, and also not being able to tell yourself it was absolutely necessary, because that's where it comes in. Putting your head down at night and then saying, shit, did I really have to shoot this guy? You know, was it really, did I have another option? And you can't be honest with yourself and tell yourself, you know, that was the only option. It's not really what you want to live with. We do have in South Africa quite good scope for self-defense. It's a big myth in our country that we can't, the criminals have more rights, all sorts of nonsense like that. I can tell you story about story of successful pleas for self-defense. The average South African doesn't understand our legal system well, so they get frustrated by the system running its course. But we actually do have a lot of scope for self-defense, and there's a lot of successful pleas for self-defense. But there's this sort of emotional thing about it where they feel slighted, or they feel it's unfair, if that makes sense, when they do commit self-defense and they get processed, or they do commit self-defense and the police rock up at home and has to take a statement and things like that. Just stop quickly. There's something else I wanted to say about that point, but I lost the thread a little bit. Let's continue. Yeah. Let's continue, and if I think about it, I'll bring us back.
Okay, no worries, and we can leave this in. This is fine. Okay. I routinely lose my train of thought. There's one more that I wanted to mention, and one of the stupid things people say, and it's train with intent, not content. And I'll just quickly read, so because it's short. Gavin said, "I don't even know what this means," and Schalk said, "Maybe YouTube content," which was very funny. So. Before I start, anything you want to say about this?
Yes. Okay. So let me give you context for that. And I got a lot of pushback on this book from certain Filipino martial arts practitioners, and also certain guys from the Piper community, both feeling that in some way I slighted them, which I don't feel I did in the book. I actually feel I did quite a good summation of the background and what it is, and I actually gave praise and honor due to where I see these systems fit in. But I even had one guy asking me, he says, you see, years that I've got a problem with FMA and Piper in my book. Can he come and visit me and maybe show me a new paradigm? And I actually invited him. I said, please come. Here's my address. Because that's my tactic. If you want to show me something, come. Let's fight. If you win, I'll learn from you. If I win, you shut up. That's what I do with everybody. And invited him over, everything, and he never actually responded after I invited him over. But with the intent thing, there's part of these movements locally that for me, training of intention, it's about understanding what your outcome is, understanding where you need to be going with this thing, and making sure that you're very focused on training within that intention. And so there's a lot of mindset and so forth, okay? Some of these guys propose that, but there's a disconnect between what the system shows and what it is they are proposing. For example, some of these systems are actually deception-based assassination systems. The goal of the system is to get close, to make sure that they can't see the tool moving, and to kill the guy. That's the goal of the system. And it's fine within that context. If that's what your tool, that's what you need, then use it and go for it, okay? But guys from some of these systems will start with this thing about training with intent, but I don't really see what they're saying align with the training methodology and what's coming out. And so that was just me taking a jab at that. Rather call it what it is. You understand? Rather say, listen, this is what we do. This is where it gets used. This is what we train. Don't call it a self-defense system or talk about tactical application and, you know, and process and principles and nonsense like that, because it's not what you do. If I look at what your training does, this is what you do. So don't say this thing that sounds very clever, but it's not actually what it is that you're busy doing.
Yeah, no, it makes perfect sense. And the reason I brought it up is because one of the main systems that I practice and teach is Tai Chi Chuan, traditional style, which many people look at me like, why would you waste your time on that? I'm like, okay, you think whatever you like. Intent is actually quite an important part of it. We call it Yi, and there's not really a great translation. I translate it as martial intent. There's one of the sayings is that in Tai Chi, the technique is broken, the intent is unbroken. And that means a bunch of things. Guy tries to punch you. You block his punch. His intent is not broken, but his technique is, he's just going to punch you again.
Yeah.
So you have to break his intent to harm you. So that's one aspect. You throw a punch, your punch gets blocked. You have to be ready to immediately do whatever you need to do next, whether it's defending, whether it's attacking, disengaging, it doesn't matter. But the intent needs to be there. And we train specifically for these kind of things because a lot of people find it very easy to throw a hard punch, but have a lot of difficulty following up when something goes wrong. So, which is one of the things that I really like about the firearms community, the failure drills, like something goes wrong. You actively practice to fix whatever goes wrong so you can put the firearm back into battery and resume shooting or whatever you need to do, which I find very much lacking in self-defense systems, and in particular in traditional martial arts that have not been transmitted correctly. I always have to add a caveat. And this emphasis on Yi, intent, for me is one of the most critical parts of training. So I get the idea that you have to train with intent, but add to that not content, that I would disagree with that. But I think intent is one of the most important things there is. We can call it mindset for some people, that works better. But that's, for instance, what I teach MMA, I teach guys, there's a really interesting model that you can use for training, and it's a pyramid of hierarchy in training. So the biggest part, the bottom, is physical. On top of that, we have technique. On top of that, we have strategy and tactics. And the top part is psychological and mental. Now, the whole point of the physical part being so big and being the bottom layer is to support the psychological and mental part, because we all know fatigue makes cowards of us all, is the expression. If you're exhausted after 1 minute, it doesn't matter how strong your mindset is, you will not perform correctly. That said, you can have all those bottom layers really, really great, but if your mind is not strong, your intent is not really solid, it doesn't matter. You will perform to a certain level, but you will eventually fail, even to somebody who you should be able to handle, because all the other stuff is there. So that's why I wanted to just add that, because I get why you mentioned it in the book, but I'm like, no, intent is really important.
No, I agree with it completely. And I think, so you're calling it intent, but for us, we talk a lot about And sometimes I want to stay away from certain terms like mindset, because mindset is everything. Mindset isn't everything. Like you said, the triangle is actually everything. You need a good balance of all of these. But for us, again, what is the job that I need to get done? And I need to be able to continue this incident and drive it there and get it done, irrespective of what's happening. And I think a lot of what you're saying for me in my mind falls into that aspect. I know where I need to go with this and I need to get it done. And we are hyper focused on it. But like I said, that was more just a bit of a tease. And again, I don't actually have. This is the thing. The community is so sensitive about these things. It's like I don't do whatever you want to do. Like I always tell people, an elbow is an elbow. It doesn't really matter that you learn the elbow in Krav Maga, that you learn it in karate. An elbow is an elbow. You can do it technically better or technically stupid, but an elbow is ultimately an elbow. So I don't actually have a problem with where the training that people comes from. For us in the Maul book, what we're trying to explain is industry-wise, there's a huge hole where working against assault dynamics is necessary. I come from a context where it was my security work or later work that I've been doing, where I need to be able to enter a space, dominate and control an individual or multiple individuals as fast as I humanly can do that, or I'm going to get hurt or killed or something.
Yeah.
This is what it's about for me. That guy there is either going to submit to me completely or he's going to assault me, or if he assaults me first, I need to be able to reciprocate. It's not going to be a duel. It's not going to be a game. There's this storm, and I have to be able to weather the storm as fast as humanly possible. But that storm relates to assault dynamics for us, not to assassination dynamics, which are valid in their context, not to dueling dynamics, which are valid in their context, but to assault dynamics. And what we're trying to say through the Maul book is that's the elephant in the room that we're not seeing. We're seeing people train against stationary opponents. We're seeing people train against people turtling up. We're seeing people doing multiple movement patterns for the opponent's single movement patterns. We're seeing people sticking out limbs and holding it there. I mean, if you punch like this. You don't punch like and hold your arm out. And so there's a big hole in the industry there. And the Maul very much speaks to that hole. It doesn't mean that we say anything else is wrong or bad, but we are saying understand what the system was developed for and capitalize on that. And if you need to adjust it, here's some principles that you can use. This is why you need to adjust it. This is what you need to think about in terms of adjusting. And here's an example of how you can adjust it. No problem with what you're doing. But like I said, the guys are super. I had one guy Instagram me, like, who are you to say this about that? I said, listen, bro, just understand quickly. I've worked in the Cape Flats. I've actually done high-risk work in the Cape Flats, including transporting large amounts of money, doing installations in fuel stations all over the Cape Flats that other people didn't want to touch. Poor Gavin, I took him along on one job one day, and I put my soft armor in, and he's like, why are you taking your soft armor? I said, no, we're going to work in Manamdar. He's like, shit, man, why don't you give me soft armor? I said, no, man, don't worry. If they start, he was super stressed out about this thing. So I've worked in the Cape Flats. I stayed in Brooklyn, which is a halfway house for people trying to get out of gangsterism. Apart from the fact that I've literally been called at night to go into a dark block of flats to go and extricate a woman that they're busy trying to kill. That's stuff that I've done, that my wife goes and drops me off and takes the vehicle and she leaves, and I tell her I'll meet you again somewhere else. Being woken up at night because the guys know me, being stabbed to pieces, and I have to bring them into my house and black bag my kitchen counter and put something over that so I can stitch them up, send them to the hospital. These are things that I've done. I can tell you multiple stories like that within the environment that those systems operate. I've trained with some of the guys from which that system originated. So I'm not saying anything bad, but what I am saying is I'm also not coming from nowhere. And it's not that I'm speaking, a bunch of fluff or secondhand information. I've been there and I've seen it, but and this is what I told the guy. I gave him a list like this. And then he was like, "Oh, okay, sorry." And he shut up, and he didn't he didn't bother me again about it. So bless whoever's doing what. I really don't mind. It's got nothing to do with me what you're doing. The Maul book isn't there to show anybody up or to criticize. It's not what we're doing. We're simply saying there's this space here called assaults, and we need to be thinking about how do we deal with assaults, and we're trying to offer a solution for that.
Well, no, you're absolutely right, and also about everybody being so sensitive in the self-defense and martial arts community. It's true. it takes a little bit of experience and maybe some humility, and often eating some humble pie before you realize, like, maybe I'm not the best there ever was. Maybe my system isn't the best there is. But that doesn't mean that it's bad. And somebody else can be awesome at something, and that doesn't mean that my stuff sucks. It just means that, okay, well, he's great at that, and that's fine. It's a really big world out there. There's a lot of room for everybody. And like you said, you see a lot of people just doing static stuff, or so just patterns, and the arm that never moves. I'm like, there's a place for that. There's a place for that in the training. Just like for the drills, there's a place for everything. The thing is that if you say, well, this is all there is, this is the best thing ever, and nothing else needs to be done, then I think it's valid when somebody criticizes you and says, like, well, maybe you're wrong about that. Or maybe this doesn't get addressed too much, like you see in the book, like, okay, the counter assault basically is something you need to focus on. Let's look at this, and here are our thoughts, our ideas, and this is from our experience what works. Okay, vaya con Dios, have fun with it. Now it's up to you.
Yeah. You must see me. If I find somebody better than me at something, I actually go ask them whether I can learn from them. I've done this many times, and like, people have thought I'm crazy. That's how I connected with that other big studio in Cape Town. I went there, I said, listen, I'm here now, I moved to Cape Town. This is why this is what I do. We spent some time together, and I saw what he does is better than what I do. I said, please, can I come and learn from you? And I spent 3 years learning from him, and I do that in the farms community. I've got I don't have a military background, but I've got good friends that come out of a special forces background, both locally and Europe. I phone them. I say, listen, I'm having a problem here. Can you either teach me or can you talk to me about it? And I learn what I need to learn, and I integrate it into what I do, and I carry on. The commercially, though, again, I've had the benefit that I've purposefully it's never for me been about building the system. My money is not connected to it. My livelihood is not connected to it. And so for a lot of these guys, I do also respect the fact that they are trying to build something, and they are trying to provide value. And most of the times, they're really sincerely trying to give their clients the best that they've got. And I respect that of them as well. But also the bad side of that is that you do now need to turn it into a bit of a personality cult, maybe, or this whole new movement of it being very mystical and, sort of dark and occultish and all these stuff. So the problem is that it takes some of these weird routes to try and build something and to try and build a system. Whereas for me, honest to God, I just want to help. If I can add some value, I'll add some value. One of the things that irritates me the most, and I'm not too sensitive about it anymore, but like on social media, you get these guys that try and catch you out. I had a guy doing it a couple of days ago again. He's like, he makes a comment, very realistic. So I say, thank you, sir. So he says, I was joking. So I tell the guy, I said, that's very clever. So that's probably the cleverest you felt the whole week, And I just laugh it off, and I carry on, and then I restrict them, because for me, the thing is, if you just ask me an honest question, I want to serve. That's basically what my life is about. And so I get irritated if you waste my time, try and catch me out, try and be sarcastic, because I don't actually pick up on that. I'm not like that, so I don't pick up on it. So I don't want to build something. I don't want to be somebody. I always tell my wife, I don't want to be that guy. I've got something that I believe might have value for some people, and I just want to be able to give it to them. Obviously, I do make some money from the books and stuff, but even the books, they're not priced very expensive. Some of them are like $5. It's nothing. I'm not going to give it away for free, because it cost me a lot of money and a lot of physical pain to get where I got. But I want to.
If you do it free, people don't value it.
Yeah.
if your blood is in the streets to learn those lessons that they're getting in that book, you know, that has a value. But
I do think so.
What you said about the comments, I got a good friend. He's a very successful author. I mean, really successful, and he also gets those kind of things. And we talk about it, and he says, what his response now is that what these people are doing, it's like masturbation, but in public. They only do it to pleasure themselves, and we have nothing against masturbation. If it feels good, that's good for you. Enjoy. But don't do it where everybody sees it. We don't want to see your thing. It's do it in private, okay? You just want to go, oh, this feels so good. I got him. And like, it's fine, but you're making a little bit of a fool of yourself by showing everybody that. So I think that's a good way to approach some of the comments you get on social media.
I'll just stop jerking off on my feed.
That's a good idea. A quick hard turn, maybe the last topic before we get to the Patreon bonus episode. So South Africa had massive civil unrest this summer. I followed that not as closely as I would have liked, but I did follow it fairly closely. There was a lot of stuff going on, and I use it very often in both private conversations, but with clients and in some of my Patreon writing. Like, look, people think that societies can't break down, and they think that it only happens in those countries, but not with us. We just had a massive protest in Brussels last week, and there was a fair bit of violence. And I'm like, societies can break down, and here's one example of what that can look like. Now, South Africa is not the US, it's not Asia, it's not Europe. It is its own thing. But I just wondered if you would be willing to talk a little bit about, you know, what in general South Africa is like, because there's a lot of myths. Like I said before we started recording, a lot of people think like, oh, this is like there's somebody trying to kill you behind every street corner, and other people, it's the most beautiful country in the world ever, and you're exaggerating. So a little bit of a more nuanced approach to this.
So obviously a complicated question. Socioeconomically, what happens is we've got a very large unemployment ratio in the country, which means there's a lot of people living in poverty, and that obviously creates a breeding ground for criminal violence, meaning violence for profit. Now, it's a complicated socioeconomic problem because in a big part also it's corruption in our government that allows this to proceed. There's phenomenal amounts of money and trade deals and things that you know, gets handed out in this nepotistic ways, you know, going to my brother and my friend and my mother and my this and my that. So that creates this sort of socioeconomic problem that we've got. Now, the issue is that creates a breeding ground for predators again, or for politically motivated individuals and so forth. And one of the examples that I frequently use is, if you take a country like Sweden, you know that the Millennium Trilogy, The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo, that book was written as a commentary on sexual violence against women. Now, that's a completely developed country. You know, they don't have the socioeconomic problems that we do, but still there's this large predatory element of violence against women that happens there. But some of the systems endemic in that country allows those predators to flourish within that environment, the gender-based violence environment. With us and with countries, you can go check it, the predatory element flourishes and finds a breeding ground within this criminal socioeconomic problem of ours. Meaning, if you took away the poverty, you won't take away the predators, but the predators will come to light. But now they are hiding within the regular criminals. So, for example, you might get a home invasion, and there's many documented cases like this. A home invasion is a residential robbery. We call it a home invasion because it gets dragged out. It's not in and out frequently. There's a lot of extreme violence within those within those incidents. But you might get 5 guys, of which 4 of them are there for the money and 1 wants to rape and kill. And you actually get these situations where one or two guys will get into an argument because the guy wants to rape the woman and this guy says it's not what we're here for. And you get these standoffs within these things. So and then the extremists, sometimes you get these little predatory groups, 2, 3, 4 males that just go on these sprees, and they're extremely violent. So that's the one stream. The other stream then is that we are when it comes to violent crime, we definitely are more violent than most other countries. And there's a history behind that in terms of it was sort of bred into that direction. We've got a lot of ex-soldiers coming in from our border wars period, guys in their 40s, 50s, very violent men, predatory by nature, that commit a lot of these more serious crimes and stuff. So there's a complicated reason why we are quite violent as a society. Now, having said that as context, what you do find is the more north you go in the country, the more violent it gets, definitely. The more south you go, the less violent it gets. That's one definite nuance in the country. So from Joburg on upwards, it also becomes more Africa going up and more cosmopolitan going down. So that's a very definite nuance. And we're having a problem in the country where a lot of people are, they're calling it semigrating. So they're actually moving out of the Joburg northern cities, coming to Cape Town and the surrounding Cape Town because of this. Then you've got your... Are we there?
Yeah.
I just had a warning that my battery is running out. I'm just going to put the charge in.
That's fine.
I need to speak in 2 seconds. Then, having said that, the other nuance that we have to understand is that cities are cities, in the sense that you will have violence in your inner cities. You'll have difficult spots in your cities. We do as well. But it's compounded by the fact that we do have these very violent individuals within our cities. And this is something I'm not very popular for in certain segments of our community. The predominant amount of violence, really horrible violence, actually happens in our Black communities and in our townships. So if you have to go look at our police stats in Cape Town for a long time was listed as one of the top-rated murder capitals in the world. But it's not really because of the Cape Town metro. It's actually, well, not the Cape Town metro, but the Cape Town suburbs. It actually relates to communities like Nyanga, which is sort of a township area central between Kailicha and a big part of Cape Town. And then the precincts around Nyanga. So from your 10 most violent precincts in the city of Cape Town, the larger metro, 4 or 5 will be townships, 2 to 3 will be related to the Cape Flats and gang-orientated stuff. And actually only about 2 or 3 would be your regular middle-class suburbs. Yeah. But there is an inordinate amount of violence. I remember I'm a minister as well. I remember in Bloemfontein, my church that I was pastoring at, we had a weekly prayer group, and at one stage we had 2 police officers come and see us saying, listen, they don't know what to do anymore, can we pray with them? And they specific precinct for the last 3 years were averaging 7 to 8 rape cases per weekend. And that's only reported rape cases. Yeah. So you have to understand it is very, very high, and it is very difficult. But again, that was located within the townships. Now, because of all of these sort of dynamics, the socioeconomic dynamics and so forth, when it comes to Black on white residential robberies and home invasions, they are unnecessarily violent. The people get tortured tremendously. They get tortured for hours on end, then they get tired up, they get killed. Old people, young people, children, men, women, you name it. But the problem is that apart from the police, the yearly crime stats, it's only those severe white cases that actually goes into the media. And so the picture is one of white people being just horribly tortured and murdered every single day of the week and so forth and so forth. But it's not really the case. The dominance, the primary amount of violence actually happens within your township areas. And then there's this you do get your usual city center sort of violence, and then you get these sort of severe home invasions and also vehicular robberies and things like that, hijackings and stuff like that. I'm not very popular when I say that because obviously there's an ethnic spin to it. So the guys that have got my skin color want me to to say that we're the only ones that's the victims, but it's not really the case. And I can speak to that coming both from a background of knowing and working with police, a background of being a minister, a background of having stayed in these communities, meaning physically gone and moved and lived in these communities for extended periods of time. It is a very violent country, but the bulk of the suffering is in our townships, actually. Yeah. In terms of people visiting South Africa, I usually tell seasoned travelers that they'll probably be safer than most of our local guys, because a seasoned traveler usually is a bit wake up. They're slightly savvy. They know they need to look after themselves. They know they need to look after their stuff. And so most of the time they're fine. And I try and actually, when I get my hands on a traveler, is to try and debrief them from all of the stories that the other South Africans tell them, because otherwise the poor guys come here and they just scared and they panicked and stuff like that. And it's actually not necessary. If you're gonna go to safe areas, you're gonna keep your eyes open, you're gonna be awake, you're probably gonna be fine. Conversely, if you go stay in a dodgy area and you leave your car outside, I guarantee you they're going to break into it on the first night, because they always, it's just something they do in South Africa, is on the first night they rob your vehicle. So if you don't put the vehicle in the garage, or you leave something on the seat, they're going to steal it. Because again, we've got this very big unemployment / poverty issue in the country. So to summarize, very beautiful country. Understand that the townships at night specifically are extremely dangerous, so you stay out of them. City centers, manage it like any other city center. Obviously, the later it gets, if there's drugs and alcohol and stuff involved, it becomes more risky. So just be wake up about that. And then if you are staying in a city, just be clever about, keep your doors locked, keep your windows locked, don't leave stuff in the car. Just the regular common sense tips does become important. How's that? Is that okay?
No, that's great. That's great. And okay. I think what you were talking about were the plaasmoorden.
Yes, exactly that. Yes.
And it's a good point that you made, is that people may not, be all that happy with you about it, because there's a racial issue here at hand, yeah, and a political one and an ideological one when you talk about that. And to my mind, it's always like, okay, I'm not saying it's not important, but as soon as you focus on that, and kind of like what you were saying, like, no, we are the real victims here, it makes the conversation very difficult to actually get to the facts, which is what people who want to visit South Africa or even move there have to know. It's like, well, actually, there's a lot more to this conversation than just this aspect of white people getting attacked, and it's horrific. I'm not saying it's not. I'm just saying that there's more to it than that. And conversely, same thing. If you say, well, let's only focus on what's going on in the townships, because that's the most horrible part, and it's the biggest part of all the violence, that doesn't mean that the plaasmoorden are now something you can dismiss. They're both. Two things can be true at the same time. Yeah. Which
so for me, essentially it's about what's the real enemy, and that's why I give the answer in this way when people ask me. Our primary problem in South Africa is the corruption in our politics. If that gets rooted out, we've actually got quite a resource-laden country. We've got one of the best banking systems, most robust banking systems in the world, probably one of the best credit acts in the world, which controls a lot of our fiscal system. We've got natural resources. We've got highly intelligent people. I mean, there were parts of history where we were leading the way in certain technology sectors. So we've got what we need. There is money, but the money gets stolen through corruption. If we can sort the corruption out, we can start sorting out the secondary problem of job creation. If we can sort job creation out, we can start looking at the poverty issue. Once we do that, we can actually start looking at the predatory issue of intercriminal violence. And that's why I answered like I answered, because essentially it's about, are we fighting the right fight? if I'm going to make it black and white, I'm not fighting the right fight, and we're going to have this problem for another 200 years. But if I understand what the correct issue is, and we put our pressure and we fight that issue, then we can actually generate some movement. So that's why I also answered like that, is to help people to understand where is the problem. But listen, if you think about 2008 to 2018, which is the last time I did a check like this, in the Mozambican War for Independence, there was estimated in a 10-year period, between 30 and 50,000 people killed in the war. In South Africa, between 2008 and 2018, 10-year period, depending on who you read, there was about 150,000 murders in that period of time. I mean, that's the same amount of time, but 3 to 5 times as much as a flippant war. That's how many murders there are. If you just 2018, there was 136,000 aggravated robbery cases in South Africa. If you do the math on that, means you can rob somebody at gunpoint or with weapon with severe bodily harm. You can have one robbery in every single municipality of our country every single day of the year, and there's going to be some left. So that's the thing we have to understand. There is a very high level of an aggravated robberies where everything happens. That's what happens there. But there's a very high level of violent crime, and sometimes extremely violent. But the problem starts in our politics and the fact that our government sort of just, I mean, we got 500 billion as a loan for COVID last year, for the pandemic. It's gone. People can't even tell us where the money is gone. I mean, you understand? And that's the pattern. So if we don't solve that problem, we're not solving any of the other problems.
Yeah, this is one of the things that people have a hard time understanding unless you know more about Africa and the countries there. I mean, obviously, me being Belgium, the Congo is one of the countries that is often in the news here. We just had this big scandal break out where the massive corruption of the Kabila clan and related. Belgium gives 100 million euros every year in aid to Congo. Nobody seems to know where it goes. And there's just massive enrichment and corruption. And before we even start to talk about addressing anything in these countries, we have to start to talk about that, because that's where everything is going to break down unless you fix this primary factor, in my opinion. I could be wrong, but I think it's a valid
I agree
point.
Completely. Yeah.
All right. Well, we covered a fair bit of ground. So what I propose is that we're going to keep recording for the bonus segment on my Patreon. I got a bunch of questions for my patrons. Anything you want to add, Schalk?
No, I'm good. Yeah.
Okay. So
Thanks,
where can people contact you?
So preferably via my public social media account. So the Maul book would be the primary one related to, I think, to this conversation.
Okay.
I do have private accounts, but I'm very non-maliciously exclusive, is what I call it, because I've got a very high regard for relationships. So if I say you're my friend, it's because you're actually my friend.
Yeah.
And so when it comes to my personal social media, it's people that I've got an active, growing relationship with. Yeah.
Yeah. No, that works great. Same thing. I have my public Facebook page. And I tell people, like, contact me there. I have a private Facebook page for my friends and family, and I very rarely let somebody in there because it's I've learned through trial and error that it's better to separate the public and the private in that regard. Yeah. All right, so I'll add that, and I'll also add some links to your books, so then people can find them right away. And again, everybody,
thanks.
You can find, no worries, you can find that at winsbottom.com/71. So 71, that's the episode that we're doing now, and everybody can find that there. All right, this was awesome. This was really great. I had a ton of fun. So we're going to keep on recording. But for now, everybody, thanks for listening. I hope you enjoyed it. Check out Schalk's work, and I'm sure there's a lot more to come from him. Okay, Schalk, thank you very much. This was awesome.
Perfect. Thanks, Win.